Hello, everybody, and welcome to Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm your host, Scott Lauber, and I cover the Phillies and Major League Baseball for the Inquirer and Inquirer.com. If you're new to the show, maybe you stumbled upon us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, where we appeared for the first time last week, let me tell you quickly what we're all about. This is primarily an interview show, and it's centered on the Phillies. We launched it back in February, 1 week before spring training, and so far, our lineup of guests has included Kyle Schwarber, JT Realmuto, Bryson Stott, Jesus Luzardo, Aaron Nola. Last week, Bryce Harper. If you like prospects, we've had Justin Crawford, Aiden Miller, and Mick Abel. We even sat down with a couple of World Series champs, Cole Hamels and Larry Boa, and that's just a partial list. Anyway, this is our 17th episode, and my guest this week is longtime Phillies play-by-play announcer Tom McCarthy. But in planning this week's show, I thought we would try something just a little bit different. Because one of my favorite podcasts in my personal rotation is The Rewatchables from The Ringer. If you don't know it, the premise is to do a deep dive into a movie that people have seen over and over and over, but never seem to get tired of watching. So I thought, let's put a baseball spin on that concept, especially since we just passed the 15th anniversary of Roy Halladay's perfect game, May 29th, 2010. And Halladay's former teams, the Phillies and Blue Jays, just happened to be squaring off this week in Toronto. So I thought I would rewatch Halladay's masterpiece. Thanks to YouTube, the full broadcast is available online. Make some notes, and then sit down with Tom to get his memories of calling the game for Comcast Sportsnet, which we now know, of course, as NBC Sports Philadelphia. Well, let me tell you, it was an enjoyable couple of hours, and not only because the game was played in a blissful 2 hours and 13 minutes. I rewatched it 5 years ago for an oral history that I wrote for the Inquirer, but on this viewing, I remembered a few things that I had forgotten. First, the game was played on the Saturday night of Memorial Day weekend, and it was opposite the Flyers in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Needless to say, the attention of most Philadelphia sports fans was not focused on the Phillies game in Miami that night. Also, I was struck by how much of the pregame conversation centered on Halladay's struggles, because this is 2010, his first season with the Phillies, and we tend to think of him as being at his apex, right? Like, he won the Cy Young Award that year. He threw a no-hitter in the playoffs. He was truly at the peak of his Hall of Fame powers. But coming into this game, he had given up 7 runs in 5 1/3 innings against the Red Sox at Citizens Bank Park. And there was a lot of talk about whether the Phillies were pushing him too hard. He averaged 110 pitches through his first 10 starts, including a 132-pitch complete game. Imagine that, 132 pitches. It didn't take long, though, for it to become clear that night in Miami that Halladay had great stuff. I remember a story that Ruben Amaro Jr. told me. He was the Phillies GM at the time, and he went down to the stands in the 3rd inning to see his brother, who was at the game. They soon realized that Halladay hadn't allowed a hit or put a runner on base, but like most baseball people, they were superstitious, so neither wanted to say anything to the other about it. Quote, from literally the 6th inning to the last pitch, we did not say one word to each other, and we both talk a lot, Ruben once told me. We just sat there in almost total silence. Well, Tom McCarthy and Chris Wheeler didn't have that luxury. Their job was to convey the mood in the ballpark as it was happening. And that was the other thing that struck me on this rewatch. As the game moved along from the 5th inning to the 6th to the 7th, and it looked increasingly like Halladay would do something special, historic actually, you could sense the excitement building in Tom's voice. I thought it was a master class in broadcasting. And his final call, hit toward third, Castro has it, spins, fires, a perfect game. Roy Halladay has thrown the second perfect game in Philadelphia Phillies history, was absolutely pitch perfect. Let's not waste any more time then. We'll get right to my conversation with Tom. And if you stick with us to the end, I'll bring in my colleague Lachlan March to discuss all the latest with the Phillies. First, here's my sit down with Tom McCarthy. Enjoy. Tom McCarthy, welcome to Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks so much for joining me.
You got it, Scott, anytime.
So we've been doing this show every week now since the beginning of spring training, and it's primarily an interview show, often with a player or a staff member, and I can talk to you about the Phillies all day long. But what I wanted to do this week was, and we'll do that at some point during the season, but what I wanted to do this week was try something a little different. I wanted to invite you on as a guest because we just passed the 15th anniversary of Roy Halladay's perfect game, May 29th, 2010, at the Marlins' former ballpark, whatever it was called then. Places had like 27 names. It was Sun Life Stadium, I think, at the time of Doc's perfect game. Anyway, the name of the ballpark was really the only forgettable thing about that night. So I wanted to rewatch the game start to finish and then talk to you about it because you were on the call, of course, for Comcast Sportsnet at the time. And I have to say, it's one of my favorite all-time Tom McCarthy calls. And I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's got to rank near the top, 3 or 4, or maybe the top for you in all your years with the Phillies?
Honestly, Scott, it's number one for me, only because, there were only 20 of them at the time. It was a remarkable feat. And it was one of those things where, as a young TV broadcaster, I'd always done radio. You're trying to make sure that you tell the story, but the adrenaline rush in the 8th and 9th inning was just unbelievable because, you just didn't want to screw it up, first of all, but it was so exciting to be part of it. It was a 1-0 game. And quite frankly, Josh Johnson had no-hit stuff for the Marlins, so it made it even better. So, yeah, I've told people when they ask me, I say it's probably number one. I've had some basketball calls, Princeton knocking off UCLA, and when Pete Carrill's last year was pretty incredible. That was my first NCAA tournament bid. St. Joseph's going to the Elite Eight with Jameer Nelson was pretty incredible too. Tom Glavine's 300th win. There was so many moments that I try to catalog, but that's the biggest one because it was such great baseball theater and history, and he was such a phenomenal athlete too.
Yeah, the entire broadcast was great. We find out, among other things, that Chris Wheeler didn't see Star Wars. I was stunned to see that. But we can get to that later. So you and I talked about this in 2020 when I wrote an oral history on the 10-year anniversary. And one thing that struck me this time on the rewatch was how much conversation there was early in the game about, how much Roy struggled in his previous start against the Red Sox because he won the Cy Young that year in 2010. It was really the peak of his powers, probably the best season of his career. And we tend to think just of the overall dominance. But I was covering the Red Sox at that time for the Boston Herald, and I remember them knocking him around in that game at Citizens Bank Park. And you guys were talking about it a lot early in the broadcast. I think the conversation in Philly was about his workload, how many pitches he had thrown to that point, right? Was that that had to kind of be like the pregame conversation going in?
It was. In fact, I looked at my scorecard the other day, and on the bottom of it was just sort of things that he did or what they're trying to do to alleviate his workload. And we think about that now. He never wanted to come out of a game. And even when he struggled against the Red Sox, he didn't want to come out of the game. And they kind of gave him the ability to just be the horse when he wanted to be the horse, which he was so good at. But yeah, and that's the thing. And I remember thinking going into this game, oh man, he got beat up by the Red Sox and he's got Josh Johnson that he's got to face. I don't know, but I always thought the best of him. It's funny because he throws the perfect game and then he throws the no-hitter in the postseason. But in my mind, I always thought it was the same thing with Cliff Lee when he was on his run. I would always think we can have something special every single night he's out there. But I know I didn't think that night because of the way he pitched against the Red Sox. But I also remember his in-between bullpen sessions where they really worked on some things, movement, splitter, that kind of thing. And that was definitely evident that night against the Marlins.
Yeah, he made some adjustments mechanically too, right? Yep. I remember him talking about working with Jamie Moyer, about some things. And so that was definitely a big part of the conversation. And you mentioned Josh Johnson. There was a lot of buzz about him at the time. I think he'd had a shutout streak going into that start. He was a legit ace. But it was also a Saturday night, Memorial Day weekend in Miami, right? And I think the Phillies were going up against the Flyers that night, who were in Chicago for Game 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So, are you sort of feeling like, hey, marquee matchup, this is going to get a lot of eyeballs, there's a lot of buzz about this game? Or is it like, hey, maybe the city's attention is on something else tonight and not Phillies Marlins down in Miami?
Well, I do think that the attention of a lot of the Philadelphia fans was on what was going on with the Flyers. There was no doubt, because I know that if I recall correctly, if you go back, the ratings for this game got higher as the Flyers game wound down and this was happening.
Sure.
So we always know that the Phillies draw well from a rating standpoint, but it was, it was playoff hockey. So it was something that was really important to the city of Philadelphia, and rightfully so. We were keeping an eye on what was going on, not really divulging what the score was, because I know people, even back then in 2010, recorded games and sometimes watched both. So you didn't want to give out too much of the information. But we did recognize that the Flyers were rolling and were on that day. But I know that I was excited about the matchup because, I mean, Josh, in my mind, Josh was going to be Roy Halladay down the road at some point. He was that good of a pitcher. So, and it was fast. Like it was moving. That game was flying by. Yeah. And I remember that part of it too. And I'm thinking, and this is before the pitch timer, obviously, I'm thinking, this is going to be like a Carlton Gibson matchup, back in the day.
Yeah, no doubt. And you said, like, you weren't going into it thinking like, boy, Roy's on a roll and he could do something special here. And he wasn't, watching him in the first inning, he's not especially precise, right, with his command. He went to a full count to the leadoff man, Chris Coughlin, and again to Hanley Ramirez. There was some talk about maybe the strike zone was kind of generous that night, right? Mike DeMuro.
Yep.
One of the things, there wasn't a pitch counter on the scoreboard back then in 2010. So you're sort of relying on you, right? And to sort of say, like, this was an easier inning, this was a harder inning, but he threw 19 pitches in that first inning. And then he falls behind the first guy in the second inning. I mean, at what point, I think Wheel says at one point, Halladay doesn't have his real command of his breaking ball tonight. So are you thinking like, boy, maybe he's going to need help from the bullpen tonight, right?
I did.
Like, I don't know if Roy's long for this game.
Well, I did. The only thing that's different about Roy is that, like a lot of power pitchers, there were times where he threw a few more pitches in that first inning. But based on the start against the Red Sox, I think the first two innings, I thought, okay, he may be able to go 7 here or 6+, but he may not be able to finish this game. But then he kind of found something. And I will say, Mike and I have talked about this a lot, the home plate umpire who's now since retired. His dad was a major league umpire and was behind the plate for, I think it was I don't think it was a perfect game, but I think it was a no-hitter. And he and I have talked about this too. I mean, his strike zone was a little favorable for both pitchers in that game. Yeah. But he was consistent. He was consistent with each of them. But I do remember early on, it was still creeping in our head, not that we wanted to make it that kind of a narrative, that, all right, he's off the Red Sox game. He's still a little off here. But then he kind of just got into a Roy Halladay rhythm after that. The Coughlin at-bats were always interesting because he would just fool with him in some ways. But he also, at that point, Chris could hit and was a really good contact hitter. I remember that part of it. I was always leery about him coming up to the plate.
Yeah, I remember people saying when I did the 10-year, oral history that, Mike had a wide zone. And watching it this time, it wasn't egregious.
It was not egregious. No.
Other than Coughlin, who had a few things to say, there weren't a whole lot of objections to it. So I think maybe if guys thought it was a wide zone, at least they thought, as you said, it was a consistent zone. He was calling it for both sides.
Yep.
And so, it struck me that, that was one memory that a lot of people had was, boy, maybe the strike zone. But again, not a whole lot of disagreement from the hitters on some of those calls.
No, and Doc used to listen, he was really good with this because the ball moved so much. He would get the Glavine-Maddox strike zone, the Smoltz strike zone. He would, because he would feed it. He would just keep feeding that area all the time. And back before we had the box, which the box obviously has taken on a life of its own for a lot of folks. And sometimes we talk way too much about it, quite frankly. But before the box, the consistency of the umpire was not always, Eric Gregg had the game with the Marlins in the postseason with Livan Hernandez. But beyond that, there were tendencies that you knew about a certain umpire. And Mike would give the edges. But again, he was fine with it. He was consistent with it. It wasn't, although I think Josh Johnson had a little argument with him at one point about a couple pitches he didn't get. But still, I think that's the umpire. That's the kind of umpire he was.
So the Phillies score the only run of the game in the third inning. Chase Utley hits that ball off Maben's glove. Maben misjudges it. The ball goes off his glove. Cameron Maben, by the way, looks like he's about 12 years old.
He does.
In this game, really baby-faced Cameron Maben. And then, Roy has kind of an easy breezy third inning, 9 pitches. And, that's the first time you say he's faced all 9 batters and retired all 9. I'm curious, I think one of the best parts about this broadcast is that in real time, like you do a good job kind of sensing, like, as it's going on, like this is getting serious, like there's something special happening here. And your voice kind of begins to rise with the completion of each inning. It sort of builds the drama, 5th, 6th, 7th, et cetera. And then of course we get late in the game and, it's something that we have to talk about. But I'm curious, everyone's thinking this might be happening. It's your job to actually say it, to convey like what he's doing. What's your philosophy on like when you start to count the number of outs in a game like this?
It's a great question. And I've always talked to young broadcasters about this. I was taught by Harry and Ernie Harwell and Vince Scully that you have to tell the story, particularly on radio. Now, TV is a little different because you have the bug that comes up after every inning. So you see the big 0 under hits. But this game actually taught me. And I had done, I think, about 5 no-hitters previously in the minor leagues. The Kevin Millwood one, which I was part of the pre- and post-game show at the time. But this game kind of taught me that I do have a sequence. So, and I've tinkered with it even since this game. So through 5, I still didn't say it was perfect. In fact, I don't think it was till the 7th inning I might have said that it was perfect. I don't remember totally. But anyway, I try to, because I still think it's early. He's through 5. He hasn't allowed a hit. But he's through 5. He's retired all 15, something like that. So people kind of get an idea of what the deal is. But that game taught me a formula. So through 4, saying a no-hitter, it's not that big of a deal. Through 5, all right, we're through 5. He hasn't allowed a hit yet. It's not that you harp on it, but you really do have to tell the story. And I think that's kind of what we tried to do there without harping on it. Hey, he hasn't a lot of base runner yet. Hey, it's perfect. All this kind of thing. Because that's what's happening on the field is the story. It's not whether I'm going to express it, but it's how I express it. And I kind of felt the adrenaline start to build as we got deeper into that game. I hope that makes sense, but it did teach me a lot about, because I reinforced that I always say it. Particularly if it's 6 through 6 innings, hey, he hasn't allowed a hit through 6. He still has a no-hitter into the 7th, that type of thing. We have no control over it except for the perception of it, but I still think we have to tell the story.
Yeah, I always think twice through the order, and now it's serious.
That's actually good. Now it's serious. And the thing about Doc is that anytime he threw, like I said, he and Cliff Lee, when he was at his heyday, you thought maybe, hey, he could do something here.
I feel that way about Wheeler right now, right?
No doubt.
With Zach, it's like, okay, something, he gets through the order one time, and you're like, all right, is something special going to happen here? They're just that good. When I'm covering a game like this, I start to circle the defensive plays that stand out, right? I don't know how many you had on your score sheet. I had 4 this time around.
It's a good question. I'm gonna pull it down while we're talking.
All right. I had the Utley kind of vacuums up a Chris Coughlin ball in the 3-4 hole in the 5th inning. I thought that was a really good play. Wilson Valdez makes the quick throw on a chopper in the 6th to get Maben.
I have that circled in red. I don't know if you can see it, but I have that one circled in red here.
Yeah. He's probably the Marlins' fastest runner, and I think, that's a really good play by Valdez there, who's filling in for Jimmy Rollins in this game. Shane Victorino, right, tracks a ball to the edge of the track in the 9th against Mike Lamb.
I didn't circle that one.
Okay.
Obviously, I circled the last one. But the inning I thought was a huge inning was the 7th, because he got Coughlin and Hanley Ramirez looking on strikes.
Right.
Like that. And I'm sitting, I know I sat there and thought, oof, that was That was big time. I don't think I had anything else circled. I definitely had the Valdez one circled.
Well, then, of course, there's the Castro smothers a one hopper that Cantu smoked in the beginning of the eighth. I thought that was a play. But, there was one of the things that's amazing about this particular perfect game is that, you don't have that play. You don't have that perfect game saving or no hitter saving play that everyone writes the sidebar story about because he saved the guys. I mean, that's how dominant I think Doc really was. There were a few hard hit foul balls, but there wasn't a whole lot in play that was, you were like, wow, that's the play of the game.
Well, I will say that the oddity to this is that like you alluded to, Valdez was at short and Castro was at third. It wasn't Pedro Feliz and Jimmy Rollins on the left side of the infield. Right. But I do think those guys made a couple plays look really easy, including the last out by Castro. I mean, he definitely made that look easy. And listen, Pedro would have done the same thing, whoever it was going to be.
Polanco, right.
Or Polanco. Gosh, I forgot it was Polanco at that point. Although Castro probably had a little bit more range. I don't know. He still would have done the same thing.
Well, again, if it's a hockey game, to go back to that hockey theme, and we're doing stars of the game, right? Obviously it's Doc's game, but then I think in some order, Castro and Valdez are probably 2 and 3. They both have 2 hits in the game. Wilson scores the run. I think it's certainly a game for those guys. And I remember talking to Castro about it at the 10-year mark, and he was like, obviously it's Doc's game and everybody remembers Doc's game. I'm happy I had a little bit of a role in it. I think that's cool, that those are 2 role players who played a big part in the game.
I totally agree. Totally agree with that. Yeah. And then Carlos behind the plate, he just got into this rhythm, man, he got into this rhythm with Roy, and he always did that. But he got into this rhythm with Roy where they were on the same page with everything.
So in the 8th inning, we get our first replays of the last Phillies no-hitter, Kevin Millwood, in 2003.
Right.
In the 9th, we get our first mention, of Jim Bunning, the Father's Day perfect game in 64.
That's where Wheels is really good because we didn't have everything we have now. And that's amazing to think that 15 years later and even 7 years later, the research that we could do at our fingertips. I don't even know if I had a computer in front of me. Honestly, Scott, I don't know if I did at that point. Paul Newman was my stat guy, and he's really good. Not the actor, by the way, but he was really good. And Jeff Halleckman, our producer, was he was just rolling back in the truck. I mean, he had all that stuff. He had the bunny. He had it all at his fingertips, and it just helped tell the story on so many levels.
Yeah. So you're in the late innings now.
Shaking,
and I'm wondering what's going.
Shaking.
What's that?
Shaking, by the way. It was weird. I looked at my hand at one point, and I'm thinking, oh boy, this is why I've gone into broadcasting, because it was the closest thing to being a player, that adrenaline rush of being a player. So
if I'm covering this game, I'm thinking what's my lead going to be, right? How am I going to set the scene? I'm writing that in my head. I'm writing it on the screen and erasing it and rewriting it and erasing it. And I'm going through different versions of this because there's the possibility that history is going to be made here, and you want to rise to the moment if you can, and write something, or in your case, say something that's going to live on with this game. Are you kind of going through a potential final out call? What's your you said the adrenaline's going, and obviously I'm sure your mind's going in a bunch of different ways. Take me into the booth at that point. I don't think you guys went to a commercial before the bottom of the ninth either.
No, that was Jeff, man. He so good as a producer. So he wanted to follow Doc out, the whole thing, and he wanted to see what the players did. I'm getting chills thinking about it because it was such a great way to tell the story. And I would never have thought about it. I would have said, let's go to break. Let's get to the commercial. No, we're going to stay here. We're not missing anything. We want to see, Mike DeMuro and how his demeanor is. We want to see who runs out for, how fast does Carlos get out there, all that kind of stuff. I didn't write anything down, and I never do. I do remember thinking to myself, 20th perfect game, second in Phillies history. make sure that you're descriptive of this call, because it's a gift to the Phillies fans, but it's also a gift to Roy, honestly, because this is special for him. And then I thought to myself, okay, I'm 2 years into doing TV full time. I'm going to do this like I do a radio game. So if you hear it, it's way more descriptive than it normally would be. And I think I did that for comfort level for myself, so I didn't screw it up, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
Because I was a radio guy who came back to the Phillies to do TV in 2008 and did 3 innings of play-by-play. Still did a majority of my stuff on TV for basketball and football. And then in 2009, when Harry passed, obviously I took over the full-time gig, but I still feel like I'm a radio guy at heart. And that's kind of what I thought. Thought to myself, don't screw it up, and be as descriptive as you possibly can. Be overly descriptive than you possibly can. And
you did. I mean, you've got Castro with the spin and so it's a real descriptive play, call of the play itself. And then, as you said, you hit, and that's why I'm wondering, are you jotting notes? Because, and then the other thing about this too is the inning takes only 12 pitches. Like
it was fast. And I think it's because they put the pinch hitters up, and those guys are like, we're going. Yeah. Like, we're hacking.
Yeah. 3 pinch hitters.
If I wrote anything down. No, I didn't write anything down. That I would usually write it in my book. No, I didn't write anything down. I generally don't write anything down because I don't want it to sound so fake.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's live TV that you kind of just, in my mind, you kind of just, whatever comes out, comes out.
Yeah. And, so it's 12 pitches and you hit all the important notes, right? So you describe the play as it's happening. And then, as you said, second perfect game in Phillies history, 20th perfect game in baseball history, second one in that season.
Yep.
You mentioned too, like, I think in that last at bat against Paulino, right? The tambourines the fans were given that you can hear throughout the game. And you're like, well, they have a reason to use the tambourines now. And I'm thinking, like, that's so great because it's the color of what's you're putting us in the ballpark with you, and sort of setting that scene. I'm wondering, do you ever hear from Doc about that call? Like, did he ever talk to you about it, or did he ever ask you about it, or do you ever have a conversation with him about the ninth inning there?
Well, I had him sign the scorecard at
cool.
the bottom. So, and I asked him first if he would do it. He went, yeah. And I'm kind of getting choked up about it a little bit. And he was looking at my scorebook because at that point I had a book. Now I do it on my iPad. It's amazing how technology's changed. And he's like looking at all the things that I wrote, all the notes I wrote, the different color pens. And, I'll be honest with you, we didn't have a warm and fuzzy relationship with him because he was so workmanlike.
Yeah.
It was all about pitching. But he was always genuine if you asked him a question. But he always had something else going on that he was like, I got to go work out. I got to do this. I got to do that. But that was probably the one time that he let his guard down, because we then talked the next day on TV. We did an interview on TV. And I think he appreciated the fact that I brought in Ruiz a lot and his teammates and, didn't always talk about him. But it was, I think, for me, it was kind of cool watching him look at my scorebook and when he signed it. And I don't keep many things, Scott, but I've got my Cole Hamels no-hitter. I've got my Tom Glavine 300th game. I've got that. And I've got those guys signing it because I thought those were really important moments for the game itself. And it also taught me that when there's a big moment, and these guys may not care about it, but when Mick Abel pitched the other day, I brought the scorecard signed by Mike Schmidt and John Kruk and myself. and gave it to his family because I don't know. I mean, if I'm a dad of a former minor league player, I think it would be kind of cool to have a keepsake, like when he had his first hit in minor league baseball and from the announcer, that type of thing. So this kind of led me. I was like, you know what? I should give this to somebody, if I can. If there's there's certain ones I want to keep. This is the actual scorecard. But there's others that I can make copies of and give out. So I've tried to do that over the years because I think they're baseball fans. They're kind of mesmerized by it too.
That's really cool. Yeah. I mean, I know. I mean, I've read about it and I've talked to people about it. The scene downstairs after the game, he takes a call from the vice president, right? Yeah. At the time, Joe Biden, and then we hear later about the watches that he gave out. I mean, you talk to Cole Hamels about it and he says, I walk by that watch every day. Right. Yep. And I remember sitting there with Jamie Moyer and watching him do this and just what an extraordinary night it was. I mean, is there, I'll get you out just on like anything you want to that we haven't touched on. I mean, does anything sort of stick out to you beyond, the game itself, beyond, beyond the, you said there were only 20 at the time. I think there are like 20.
I think there's 4 more now, right?
Yeah, and there hasn't been one in there hasn't been one in quite a while. I think just one since 2012. So, I mean, obviously, like you said, he no-hits the Reds in the postseason, and that's a huge thing. But 27 up, 27 down, a spotless scorecard. I mean, there's something about perfection that's I think it's the signature game of his career.
Well, it is, and then I keep going back to it, but Josh Johnson allowed 1 run.
Yeah,
it was so narrow. And Cameron Maybin never drops anything.
Yeah,
and he dropped that ball that led to the double. But I also think about all the people that this impacted. You said Mike DeMuro. I mean, it's something he'll always remember as the home plate umpire. Rich Doobie, who was such an amazing pitching coach and did so many amazing things, and how impactful this was for him. Carlos Ruiz, who then went on to, keep catching no-hitters and things like that. Ryan Howard, for everything he accomplished, to see his reaction when he caught that ball and Jimmy Rollins busting his chops saying, I just wanted Ryan to catch the ball. Things like that. The 9th inning with those pinch hitters, the catch by Victorino in center field by Lamb, the Wes Helms strikeout.
Wes Helms and Ronnie Paulino, Phillies, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I just realized how much that impacted everybody. And for us on TV, it brought out the greatness of a lot of individuals. I mentioned Jeff Halleckman, our producer, who was just unbelievable. Ray Tipton, who's a stunning director and is a Hall of Fame director who did all the big games for Fox for so many years, and Wheels and Sarge. But Wheels having the recall of the Jim Bunning stuff. He was a computer all by himself, that type of thing. It's why I like TVs, because it's not always about the play-by-play guy. It's about the teamwork. Yeah. And I never thought I would like it, but I do love it because of that, because so many other talents came out during that game. And I think that was really cool. And again, I did in my mind think about this. I said, this is a gift that I'm getting to do it, but it's a gift for the Phillies fans and for baseball and for, in particular, Roy in what he was able to accomplish. I mean, we're so fortunate we got to watch him pitch.
Well, T-Mac, this was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed rewatching it again the other day. I hadn't watched it in 5 years. It's one of my favorite broadcasts ever. And I hope you had some fun reliving it with me. You always have a lot going on and you're really generous with your time. So I really appreciate you sharing some of it here with us on Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks so much.
No, it's my pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
I want to thank Tom McCarthy again for sitting down with us this week. Let's get to our Reporter's Notebook segment, and I'll bring in my Inquirer teammate, Lachlan March, who is doing a great job in her first full season covering the Phillies. Lachlan, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, by the time most people listen to this, the Phillies will have come and gone from Toronto, but it's worth mentioning that Toronto is your hometown. So I have to ask, who has enjoyed being back home more? You, Jordan Romano, or Rob Thompson?
I mean, I think we've all been enjoying it in different ways. I think we all got to go home. Like Jordan talked about, he had a taco night with his family, and Rob went home on the off day as well. And I'm home right now. I'm coming to you live from my parents' house in Toronto. So, yeah, we all I think got the chance to see some family and go back to our hometowns for a bit.
That's great. I do want to ask because, so when I was growing up, my dad took me to a lot of games at the old Yankee Stadium. And I remember how I felt in 2008 covering the All-Star game there. The game goes to extra innings, and I'm like the only writer in the press box who didn't care. Because for me, being there, getting to cover a game at this place where I spent so much time as a kid, they could have stayed there all night for all I cared. It could have gone 20 innings. So, what's this kind of been like for you? Because I know this is sort of the city and the country, right, where I'm sure you sort of fell in love with baseball and decided, hey, this is what I want to do for a living. I want to write about baseball.
Yeah, I definitely grew up going to the Rogers Center. But I mean, I haven't been actually since they've redone it. And I think the past couple of years, they completely renovated it. So it's been very, very cool to just, first of all, take a peek behind the curtain and be in the bowels of the stadium, running to the field and to the clubhouse and that sort of thing, the places that I would never have seen when I was a kid. But then also getting a look at, how different it looks from what I remember. But yeah, it is pretty sentimental in a way because I have a lot of memories at that stadium, and so to be there in a professional capacity is pretty cool.
Now, the last time I was there, the press box was still behind home plate. They moved it, right? They moved it down one of the foul line, down one of the third baseline.
Yeah, we're in left field. So it's that's kind of odd. And it's kind of a long journey to get to the visitors clubhouse, which is on the first base side. So you have to go all the way around, and we have to hurry after the end of the game to get there in time to catch the post game comments from the players and Rob. So that is definitely a unique feature of it. Definitely. I don't think I've been in a press box that isn't behind home plate yet in my career.
Yeah, there are a couple, Cincinnati, and there are a couple of others. I will tell you this. I don't know if I told you this story. So I go to Toronto one time to cover the Red Sox and the Blue Jays, and I check in. I stayed at that hotel that's right there, that Renaissance Hotel or whatever it is. And I check in, and they offer me an upgrade to a stadium view. And I'd never had that. So I thought, oh, this is great. I'll do that. Sure, no problem. Well, it was so basically my view was from center field, which was the opposite view of the press box, which was from home plate. For 3 days, I felt like a hamster in a wheel, just kind of going around and around and around and seeing the same view from opposite sides. So I'm not telling you I would not advise doing that one of these days, but I would just say that it's not all that it's cracked up to be.
It was pretty cool because some of the people, I guess, staying in the hotel for this weekend have put up Phillies flags in the windows.
Oh, that's neat.
That you can see from basically standing on the field. They're in center field. So, I mean, there's clearly some Phillies fans who are staying there.
Nice. Okay, let's dive in here on all this Toronto talk. Let's start with the center of the Phillies universe, Bryce Harper. There was that old famous Reggie Jackson quote about being the straw that stirs the drink. Well, I think it's clear that Harper is the straw that stirs the Phillies, right? After getting hit on the elbow and missing 5 games and they lose 4 in a row, he comes back to the lineup Tuesday night in Toronto, hits a homer in the first inning. And I thought the quote in your story from Christopher Sanchez said it all, right? He said, everything changes when he's back. So it might sound like an obvious question, but, did you sense that maybe just having him back in the lineup kind of helped settle everyone and maybe get the lineup sort of equilibrium back again?
Yeah, I think just like what Sanchez said, I mean, he's obviously a pitcher, but he can sense that it's just affected the mood in the room. And I think talked to Trey Turner about it, who hit 2 homers in the series opener. It affects how the other team is thinking. So just knowing that he's in the on-deck circle about to come up will change how they approach Trey. So it completely changes the complexion of the game, just knowing that he's available and ready to be back.
You also caught up with Jeff Hoffman the other day for a story that everyone should read at Inquirer.com. And it was clear that he's still close with several of his former Phillies teammates. So Ryan Kerkering, we know he's very close with Matt Strahm. But based on what he told you, it does not sound like he ever thought he was close to re-signing with the Phillies as a free agent last winter. What did you kind of take away from the conversation with Hoffman, and how's he enjoying kind of life in Toronto with the Blue Jays?
Yeah, I think he definitely likes it. We talked to him in the clubhouse in Toronto, which is probably the nicest clubhouse that I've ever seen. If that's also something that they've redone, I was kind of shocked at how like fancy it was. So I think he's liking that part of it. But I do think that he's happy where he's at. He had some success to start the year, but has had some difficulties in the month of May, although he said he feels like he's started to turn a corner, so he thinks he's in a good spot. I did find it interesting that he always had interest in returning to Philly, but he from what he said, he didn't think that there was like reciprocated interest. He didn't think that as he wasn't getting an extension as the season went on, he thought it was less and less likely that he was actually going to re-sign in Philly. But at the same time, he doesn't have any hard feelings. He really appreciates the opportunity that he got because Philadelphia was obviously where he kind of became the pitcher that he is now. He turned from just like a minor league guy, signed a minor league contract, to a high leverage guy in the bullpen. And that happened in Philly and working with Philly coaches and that sort of thing. So he has a lot of respect and gratitude towards Philadelphia for that. So I don't think that there's any hard feelings there. He's obviously still very close, like you said, with a lot of the people from the bullpen, and they had a lot of time catching up before the game on Tuesday. So yeah, but I did find that interesting that he really didn't think that there was the Philadelphia Phillies were interested in him, even though he thought he wanted to stay.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think it was a mutually beneficial relationship that they had for 2 years, right? He was a first-round pick of the Blue Jays, ironically, got traded almost right away within a year of getting drafted, bounced around a little bit. And by the time he got to the Phillies, it was like, this is your time, right? Like either you have success or, he had 1 foot out the door to go play overseas. And for 2 years, he was terrific in the Phillies bullpen. It got him a 3-year contract elsewhere. And he certainly helped the Phillies for a couple of years. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't imagine that there are hard feelings there, and there shouldn't be, because they certainly helped him get to this point, even if it wasn't with them in the end. Let's just do something else here before we let you go. We're still 6 weeks away, I think it is, from the All-Star game, but it's never too early to start thinking about who might end up in Atlanta next month at that event. Phillies had 7 All-Stars last year, 8 All-Stars last year. It was crazy.
Like that.
I think there are probably 2 locks, Kyle Schwarber and Zach Wheeler. But beyond that, I think that we could talk about, 4 or 5 other guys who might have a chance, might not have a chance. Beyond Schwarber and Wheeler, who else do you kind of think are sort of, should we expect, maybe to get selected from the Phillies? And of course, a lot can happen in the next 6 weeks. But if we're sitting here today on June the 4th, who are your Phillies All-Stars?
Well, first of all, I would just have to say Trey Turner. Like, I think that he's pretty much a given based on the way he's been hitting. And I mean, he's been hitting for average all season, but the power has really started to come. He feels like he's made some adjustments, and those are starting to pay dividends. So I would say him. I think you can never count out Bryce Harper just with the fan vote, and no matter how he's doing, although in the past month he's been doing well before the injury, and he hasn't seemed like he's missed a step since he came back. Let me think of who else. Do you have any other ideas?
So I agree with you. I think Trey Turner's starting to put up the numbers to get there. I do start to look this time of year around the league to sort of see what the competition's like at different positions. And, I think Francisco Lindor is going to be an all-star. I wonder if Elly De La Cruz ends up being the Reds representative. Everyone has to be represented. I mean, the Rockies have to have a representative, right? And their shortstop is probably their best player, Ezekiel Tovar. So I kind of wonder whether Turner runs into some numbers at shortstop. I think the same with Harper. Like, you look at Pete Alonso, Freddie Freeman. Does Michael Busch make the game from the Cubs? I wonder if this year is the year where, like, the Phillies are it's Kyle Schwarber and a bunch of pitchers, because I think you could still make a case for Jesus Luzardo. I know the numbers, are now inflated after that unfortunate start last Saturday where he got left in the game for too long to give up the 12 runs. But, I think if you look past the numbers and you look how he arrived at those numbers, you're like, oh my gosh, every single start's been great except for that one true outlier. Christopher Sanchez, I think, makes a compelling case to maybe get in this year. So, whereas last year it was kind of like Strahm and Hoffman, and maybe that's how they built up that large all-star contingent. I wonder if this year it's some of the pitchers. It's a pitching-heavy delegation for the Phillies.
Yeah, I think that probably makes a lot of sense. I think their biggest strength is obviously the rotation, and I think everybody knows that. And I mean, like you said with Luzardo, yes, his numbers look very different now than they did a week ago, but I think people can understand, it was one kind of outlier start that has inflated that. And if you look at his total body of work, I think standing right now, he would deserve a spot.
Yeah, I think people who pay attention will understand. Like, obviously we do because we cover them every day, but it's, I think, going to be a test of, do people just look at the numbers or do they dig into them? How much do they do that? Because, a 3.5 ERA, if that's what it ends up being at the break, looks a lot less impressive when you consider, when you just look at it. But then when you consider like what went into it, if that's truly the outlier there, then he did have a week ago, you could have made the case he should start the All-Star game for the National League. So I think he's still in that mix, but we'll see how much people pay attention to how he got there.
Well, he has a new hairdo now, so
I heard that cornrows, right?
Put up to Toronto with cornrows, and so maybe that'll, I don't know, start a new kind of turn things around for him.
It worked for Bryce Harper, right?
Exactly, it did.
All about the hair.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I would do the same, but I just don't have a lot to do with this. So anyhow, Lachlan, thank you so much for hopping on, especially from Toronto. Enjoy the rest of your time at home. Safe travels back to Philadelphia, and I will see you next week at Citizens Bank Park.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's move to our last segment. We call this Hit and Run, where we take a question from a reader, viewer, listener, follower, etc. And this is a perfect time to mention that you can submit a question by email at slauber@inquirer.com or by finding me on X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads. I'm wherever you want to go on social media. I'm probably there. So feel free to hit me up on any of them with a question or a comment. Lots of questions this week about the bullpen and how the Phillies might improve it before the trade deadline on July 31st. Let's go with this comment and question from Skipdog on Inquirer.com. This whole Jose Alvarado scenario has the same stink to it as when the Phillies traded away future Hall of Fame second baseman and Hall of Fame pitcher Ferguson Jenkins for a couple of old rag arms from the Cubs decades ago. Why not put Aaron Nola in the pen, as he's very effective for 2 innings, and add another piece or two until Alvarado returns? And yes, I know he's not eligible for the postseason. Andrew Painter and maybe Mick Abel are also ready to help. Trading away any top 5 to 10 prospect or worse for instant gratification might doom this franchise. Well, Skipdog, thanks for the comment. So I wrote this in the paper last week. July 31st is still a ways off. The market hasn't even taken shape yet. And since the advent of the third wild card in each league, most fringe contenders tend to hold off on even deciding whether to buy or sell until a week or so before the deadline. So what the Phillies are doing over the next 4, 5, even 6 weeks is they're going to explore their internal options, right? Taijuan Walker is moving to the bullpen. Seth Johnson just got called up from AAA. If either of them is able to get some big outs late in close games, maybe the Phillies will have to add only one reliever at the deadline instead of 2. I don't see Aaron Nola as an option out of the bullpen for 2 main reasons. First, he's never done it before. And second, his stuff doesn't really profile as late inning swing and miss stuff. But of the 13 best pitchers in the organization, ask yourself this: how many of them are starters? I'd say 8 in no particular order: Zach Wheeler, Christopher Sanchez, Jesus Luzardo, Nola, Ranger Suarez, Walker, Abel, Painter. You don't need 8 starters in the postseason. In fact, you probably only need 4. So I think what the Phillies are going to do is ask, which of those 8 guys profiles best in the bullpen? Ranger Suarez has done it before and quite effectively. Christopher Sanchez, has a big fastball and a great changeup, 2 pitches that would play up really well in short bursts. I wonder if Mick Abel, who has a big fastball and a really good curveball, could handle that. Not now, but maybe in September, if everyone's healthy, maybe you take Suarez and Abel and put them in the pen, and maybe they help you there. The Phillies are still absolutely 100% in a win-now cycle. And if Dombrowski thinks that trading for another reliever will put them over the top, this might be the year that he pushes in a prospect chip or 2 and a really, really good one. But I don't see Justin Crawford or Aiden Miller, or certainly not Painter, going in a deadline trade. Dombrowski wouldn't move them for Garrett Crochet last offseason. He's certainly not going to do it for a rental reliever just because Jose Alvarado got suspended. All right, let's leave it there for this week. Quick programming note. Every episode of Phillies Extra is available on Inquirer.com, on the Inquirer's YouTube channel, on Facebook, and now, I'm excited to say, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please follow us, give a listen, and I think, as they say in the podcasting world, rate and review us. You can also head over to the Inquirer Live page at Inquirer.com and click on the Sports tab to find a full archive of all of our interviews. If you've missed any, they're all right there, so please go back and check it out. That'll do it for this week. Thanks again to my guest, Tom McCarthy, and to Lachlan March. And we couldn't do this show every week without the work of our producer, Angelica Irizarry, who does so much great work behind the scenes. Until next week, I'm Scott Lauber. Thanks to everyone for listening, watching, and of course for reading the Philadelphia Inquirer.